Okay, good evening, friends. We're continuing in Masechta Nedarim, Daf Yud Daled Amud Aleph. The Mishnah said the following are mutter. Chulin sha'oichalach. If you say what I eat of yours is chulin, if I say it's like the meat of a pig, because it's a davar aser, it's mutter. Kavos kaychavim, like avodah zara, even though it's aser bahana, still you can't be madfis in avodah zara. Ka'oros levuvin, that's avodah zara that you cannot be mavatel, or kinevelos sutreifos, whether it's you said it should be aser like a davar tameh, or kishkatim ramasim, or a davar tameh that is aser even b'ka'adasha, or like the chala of aroin, it's mutter. Okay. The Gemara made the following diak. Let's read again the Gemara. Taima de amar chulin sha'oichalach. The reason why it's mutter is because this is on the bottom of your Gimel Beis. You said chulin, that which I eat from yours. Ha amar la chulin sha'oichalach. But if you say that which I eat from yours should not be chulin, mashma loy lechulin lahave ela carbon, which is mashma it should not be chulin but rather a carbon, then it's aser. So that implies we say Miklal Lavat Hashemehin. Mani Masnisin, who's the Mishnah like? Rabbi Meir. If it's Rabbi Meir, Halasle Miklal Lavat Hashemehin. If it's Rabbi Meir, he does not hold that from no you infer yes. Meaning it can't be Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir does not subscribe to Miklal Lavat Hashemehin. So who is the Mishnah like? Vela Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishnah must be like Rabbi Yehuda. But Hainu Reisha, that we already had that on Daf Yud Amud Beis, that it says that Lachulin Sha'oichalach, it's aser, like Rabbi Yehuda. Hainu Reisha, we already had that earlier. So the Gemara says, Aidi de Ketani Kebesar Chazir Kavodas Kechavim. Once it already said that you can't be madfis b'davar ha'aser, lachi ketani chulin. Therefore, it said chulin sha'oichalach. It didn't say chulin sha'oichalach to be medayek, that if you would have said la chulin, it would not work. But rather, it just said it gerara agavorcha. Says the Ran. Ella Rabbi Yehuda hi hainu reisha masnisin de perka kama, the Mishnah of the first parak. The Tnan lachulin sha'oichalach, kari reisha. That's called the reisha. So the Ran says something interesting here. The Ran says v'nira be'enai, dahachi perusha. This is what the Gemara means to say. Bishlama ikra meir matukma. Bishlama, if this Mishnah was going like Rabbi Meir, like tikshilan hainu reisha, we would never ask, oh, it's the reisha. Mishum dahidel elokim na Rabbi Yehuda. Because what we said earlier is Rabbi Yehuda. V'hachi katani, and what we said earlier was Rabbi Yehuda Omer ha'omer Yerushalayim. V'hacha sasam lantana dafilu Rabbi Meir delesle miklal lavat hashemehin b'hamoida. And here, this Mishnah could even go like Rabbi Meir, who does not subscribe to miklal lavat hashemehin. Here he's moida mishum dekivan de amar loy chulin. Since he said not chulin, al karchin carbon have. Meaning, maybe the earlier Mishnah would be only like Rabbi Yehuda, because maybe Rabbi Yehuda is the only one who subscribes to Miklal Lavat Hashemehin when it's some type of not such a clear Miklal Lavat Hashemehin. Let's say you say La, but if you would say Loy, then maybe even Rabbi Meir subscribes to it. But now what the Gemara is saying is you can't say this goes like Rabbi Meir. Because he does not subscribe to Miklal Lavat Hashemehin. Even in such a scenario, Rabbi Meir would not even subscribe to an explicit Miklal Lavat Hashemehin. Even if you say Loi Chulin, he still would not subscribe to Miklal Lavat Hashemehin. Islan Lamishri, he should matter it. So, who's the Tana of the Mishnah? If it's Rabbi Yehuda, we already had Rabbi Yehuda's Shita on Daf Yud. If it's Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi Meir does not subscribe under any circumstance to Miklal Lavat Hashemehin. Says the Gemara, Ravina, so it's ID. Says the Ran, ID de katani kibasar chazer kolaymar ha diktani chulin shaychalach lav legufe. It's not for the teaching itself. It's not to teach halacha that if you say chulin shaychalach it's aser. V'lav lediyuka. It's not to be medayek that if you say lekarbon it would be aser. Ela agav gerara deshara pasach behachi. But rather, it's agav the other cases that are mentioned. Okay. The Gemara continues. Ravina Amar. Ravina says, Hachi Katani. This is what the Mishnah means to say. Ve'elu mutarim kechulin. The following are mutar like chulin. That means mutar like chulin means you don't even need a hatara. And they are kibasar chazir, ka'avodas koichavim. Meaning the reason why it says chulin, it's pashut if you say that if it's chulin shaychalach, it's mutar. No, the reason why it says chulin here is so that you know that all the other cases, not only is the neder mutar, even not only is it a not chal, you don't need any hatara at all. So the Ran says hachi katani ve'elu mutar kechulin kolaymar ka'omer chulin shaychalach. Like if you say chulin shaychalach she'hei mutar legamri, that it's completely mutar v'loy boy she'ela, and you don't need a she'ela at all. Frek the Gemara umi'ikal asuki al daite hachi. I'm sorry. V'i loy tana chulin havamina boy she'ela. And if it would not have said the case of chulin, you would have thought you do need a hatara. Umi'ikal asuki al daite hachi. Would anybody really think this? Hamidiktani seifa. Ha'omer le'ishtay harei aralai ki'ima poitzrin loy pesach v'makam acher. The fact that the seifa of the Mishnah said that if you tell your wife, you're usher to me like my mother. So the neder, even though it's not chal, you have to be poisech a pesach from elsewhere, but you need some form of hatara. So if in the Seifa it says Poischon Lai Pesach Makam Acher, that implies in the Reisha you do not need to be Poisech Pesach Makam Acher, you don't need Sheila at all. Meklal the Reisha Loi Boy Sheila. So don't say the reason why it said Chulin in the Mishnah is to teach that you don't need She'ela. It's Pashat you don't need She'ela, because only in the Seifa where it mentions that Pesach, Pesach, Makam Acher, only there you need She'ela. But I never would have thought in the Reish you need She'ela. Ala Machvarta Chulin Memela Nazba. But it's clear, like in the first answer, that it just said it, Agavorcha, says, okay. So the Gemara continues. Minahani Mili. From where do we know? The Mishnah says that if you say K'b'sar Chazir, K'avodas Koichavim, it's mutter, that you can't be madfis in a davar ha'asar, only in a davar ha'nadar. Minahani Mili. Where do we learn this from? Amar Kra, Ish, Ki yidar neder la'Hashem, ad sheyidar b'davar hanadar. The pasuk says, a man who makes a vow to Hashem, ish ki yidar neder. From there we learn ad sheyidar b'davar hanadar, until you make a neder with another davar hanadar. So the Gemara says that's what I learned from sheyidar neder. Because if that's the case, we should include even a davar asar, because the next words are hachi, afilu b'davar asar nami, even a davar asar, you should be able to make a neder. The haksiv, because the pasuk says, ish ki yidar neder, ish ki yidar neder l'Hashem, oy hishava shvua le'esar isar al nafshay. So le'esar isar should teach even if you made a neder b'davar asar. Says Gemara, no, Lasar Isar teaches me something else. Lasar Isar mi baile lechadatanya. Lasar Isar, I need it for that which we learned in the Braisa. Eizehu Isar Amar B'Torah. What's the Isar that's mentioned in the Torah? Because we learned earlier on, let's see where, on Daf Yud Beis, on Daf Yud Gimel, we learned earlier that how do I know you can make a neder? Let's say I say I aser this day ki yom shemes by aviv. So even though yom shemes by aviv, you were the one who aser that day. If you say zeh kazeh, it's aser. How do I know if you are matfis a neder in another entity or another day that you asered, and that first day that you asered was not aser to anyone else other than yourself? So it's not like you're matfasid in a karban. You were matfasid in something that only you were aser to. How do I know that's effective? So that I learned from ish ki yidar neder lashem. But I'm sorry, that I learned from le'esar isar. Okay. Ezehu isar amar b'tar. Fine. The Ran says, Minahani mili de matfis b'davar asar loy mitzvah. How do I know if I'm matfis in a davar asar it's not asar? Amar kra ki yidar neder ad shida b'davar another. Okay, so here's the Ran, classic Ran. The Ran breaks down the makshin and the tartzan. Nira beinai dachi perusha. The sfira lahashas, the supposition of shas is the ashma'ina, and it's coming to teach. Den matfis b'davar hanadar mitzvah loy tzarich kra. That the fact that you could do a hatfas on a davar anadar, that doesn't need a pasuk. To kivan the amar kikar ze alai asar, when I say this kikar is asar, have a neder. So you made a neder. I need a pasuk to say, I could say davar ze alai kikarban, it's asar. So ki amar nami kikarban, asar kamar. If I say davar zeh alai kikarban, I'm also making an eder. It's not worse than a yad v'legar miyadais. I need a pasuk that you could be matfis b'davar another. If I could say davar zeh asar, and that's an eder, then of course I could say davar zeh kikarban. I mean, even if I'm not outright saying that I'm making an eder, but it's at least a yad for an eder. So I don't need a pasuk that you could be matfis b'davar hanadar. Elavade kra. You know what the pasuk is teaching? Not that you could be matfis b'davar another, that you can't be in matfis b'davar ha'asar. Elavade kra d'chiyidar neder lav l'davar another asar elamute davar asar. So that was the Havamina of the Gemara. Ish kiyidar neder lashem. That it's coming to say you can only be matfis a davar on a davar another, from a davar another. But not that I need a pasuk for that, it's to exclude that you can't be matfis from a davar asar. Uparchinan, the Gemara asks, Sihachi, if so, afilu b'davar asar nami. Even b'davar asar. Why? Da'aksiv lesar isar. It says lesar isar, kolaymar, da'al karchach kol chad legufei yitzrich. Al karchach, each one is needed legufei. Meaning, you must have made a mistake. Maybe it's not pashuk. You could be matfis b'davar another. Lesar isar, Lindar neder teaches you could be matfis b'davar another, and lesar isar says you could be matfis b'davar asar. We don't need a pasuk that you could be matfis on a davar another. Must be we were wrong. It must be you do need a pasuk. V'lav l'mu'utei, not to come to exclude the chihechido itesek adait in the matfis lo have a neder. It's so that you don't come to think that hatfasa doesn't work. So Kasav Rachmana Hani Treikrai, the merciful one, wrote these two psukim, Lashmi'inan, to teach the matfis b'davar another or matfis b'davar asar have an eder. That if you're matfis b'davar another or you're matfis b'davar asar, it's an eder. V'chol chad minayu chayal, and each one is chal. Di'iloi, otherwise lesar isar my mukmasle. What are we going to do with lesar isar? That's the Gemara's kasha. And the Gemara says, no. Lesser Isser, I need to teach me that you could be matfis on a davar another, that I'm the only one who that original neder was asr to. Umefarkinan, the Gemara answers, Lesser Isser misbay l'chedatani. Lesser Isser is needed for that which we learned in the Brayse, Ezehu Isser, Kolaymar, Fikivan de Evshel Kamua Lahach drasha, since it's possible to establish for that drasha, so therefore we could go back and say our original supposition was correct, that lindar neder is to teach that you cannot be matfis b'davar aser. Lahachi mukmasla, that's what it's established for. Mishum de svara, it's a svara. De matfis b'davar aser, that if you're matfis b'davar aser, loy chayal, it's not chal. De bishlama b'davar anador, Now here's the Ran of the century, because this is the Ran that we read on Sunday, which is a stira to the Ran in Shavuos. I highly recommend that. I think last week's was the most important Ian show we had so far on Nedarim. Really, really beautiful stuff. But we read this Ran, so you're going to get a good foundation now. What now the Ran says, why could you be matfis b'davar hanadar and not b'davar ha'asar? It says very simple. I'll say it outside first. Because what am I saying? I said, I want to create an Isser Neder on this piece of meat. Just like that piece of pig, just like that piece of pig is not Usser through a Neder. It's the Torah Ussered it. Your statement is meaningless. If I say, I want to Usser this piece like the piece of pig, that's a meaningless statement. The piece of pig you didn't answer. How could you say you want to answer this like that? You didn't answer that. But if you say I want to answer this like that other piece of meat that you answered through another, that makes sense. You could say kikar zeh alai b'neder. This kikar is also to me in the neder. The carbon shenesa idei neder. I think it should say kik carbon, like a carbon that became asur through a neder. Avol ki matfis b'davar asur loy klum kamar. You said nothing. We say, I want this to be asur like a piece of pig. The only thing is, pal, you didn't asur pig. God asured the pig. The hechi lema kikar zer like b'sar chazir lo yafsha. That's meaningless. The b'sar chazir asur rachmanav hu lo yasrei. And we pointed out on Sunday, Rabbi Chanan asked that this is a stira to the Ran in Shavuos. The Ran says the reason why you can only be matfis b'davar another is because the way Hatfasa learns, it's hamshachas kedusha. You're continuing, you're drawing kedusha. So if the other item was a carbon, you're drawing from the Isser carbon of the other item. But if the other item is Basar Chazir, there's no Kedusha in a Basar Chazir. What exactly are you drawing? You're drawing Isser, you can't draw Isser. Neder is like a hekdesh. You could pull it, you could draw it. And the Gemara answers that I need lesser Isser to teach, like we learned earlier, that what's the Isser the Torah is talking about? If I say that Harei olai ki yom zeh ki yom shemes by Abba. Says the Ran la'ashmina da'afa gav de toli nidrei b'neder shlei neser elo loy levada. Even though you're hinging your neder on a neder that only was usher to him, dahainu yom shemes by aviv. That is the day that your father died. Chayil nidra, the neder is chal. Di'ilav haikra, had it not been for this pasuk, hava amina, I would have thought ki yidar neder. Ad sheyidar b'davar shu another legamri, until you make a neder in something which is nadr legamri. Shene'esar mikol, that it's usher to everyone. Machmas oisei neder. You would think you can only be matfis in a neder that's usher to everyone, not in a neder that's only usher to you. Kamashmal kra de lesser iser. Next sugya. One who says to his wife, you're usher to me like my mother, which is just my personal advice is not to say that, but that's what the guy did. Ha'omer le'ishtai harei adolai ki'ima chulu uraminhi. Could ask a stira, harei adolai kibasar ima. Right, so the Mishnah says, if somebody says, you are usher to me like my mother, so poitzim loy pesach avimakam acher. The nether seems to be chalas somewhat, and you can't just indiscriminately matter, you need to come up with a heter mimakar macher. Okay? So, says the Gemara, Raminu asks a stira, we learned in a Braisa, Harei adolai kibasar ima. If you say to your wife, you're usher to me like the flesh of my mother, kibasar like the flesh of my sister, ka'arla, like arla, uka klei hakarem, and like klayim, lo yamar klom. You said nothing. So you see, it's not chal at all. You don't even have to be posech pesach mimakar macher. Amar Abai said, lo yamar klom midoraisa. Now, really, the neder is meaningless midaraisa. Why is it meaningless? Because you're matfis bedavar ha'asr. Your mother is asr to you just as an isr Torah. Your sister is asr to you as an isr Torah. So midaraisa, the neder is not chal. But v'tzarch she'ela midrabanan. Midrabanan, you need hatara. That's Abayi's answer. Abayi's answer is the neder is not chal midaraisa, it's only chal midrabanan. Rava Amar, Rava says, look, it's not even chal midrabanan. When the Brisa says, lo yamar klum, lo yamar klum, in other words, we have a problem. The Mishnah says you need hatara, the Brisa says, lo yamar klum. So Abayi said, lo yamar, you need hatara midrabanan, lo yamar klum midoraisa. Rava doesn't buy that. If it says lo yamar klum, it means it's nothing, even on a rabbinic level. So what does Rava say? Rava Amar haba talmidei chachamim haba ama aretz. Really, it's not even chala on a rabbinic level. The Mishnah says you need hatara. It's talking about an ama aretz. Why an ama aretz? Because in this case, look, you are matfis b'davar ha'asar. Everybody knows hatfasa b'davar ha'asar is nothing. Even amei aretz know that. If an ama aretz says kikar zeh asar k'basar chazir, it's meaningless. You don't even need, even an amaretz doesn't need hatara. But when he's dealing with his wife, where it's very common for one spouse to just blurt out some kind of, oh yeah, but you're usher to me. So then an amaretz, even though regularly by a davar usher, you don't need any hatara, but we have to protect the indiscriminate nedara making, and therefore an amaretz needs hatara. And the Gemara is going to bring a raya that amei aretz are treated differently from a different case where there, across the board, an amei aretz will always need hatara, even not by a wife, because in this case it's not so pashut that the neder is not chal. And the raya of v'hatanya we learned in a brisa. Usually v'hatanya is a question. Here v'hatanya is a proof. It's what we call benichusa. V'hatanya we learned in a brisa. Hanoider b'toira lo yamar klum. If you make a neder by the Torah, you didn't say anything. Now why not? Even though you didn't say anything, you still need a shelas chacham. Talmid chacham doesn't need a shela, because really it's a davar ha'asar, but it's a very subtle davar ha'asar, and therefore amaretz will always need she'ela. Let's just see the final ran. Habit talmid chacham dikiven the tani lo yamar klum. Since it says lo yamar klum, like we pointed out, Rava holds masha shein tzach she'ela klal v'afil midrabanan. It's mashma you don't need she'ela at all, even midrabanan. And it's going on a talmid chacham v'ayri b'talmid chacham. V'hatanya, we learned in the rest. V'nichusa k'leimer di'afagav d'tzarch she'ela la'amaretz. Even though you need a she'ela for amaretz, tani lo yamar klum. It said lo yamar klum. Kiven the talmid chacham ain't tzarch she'ela. Okay, we'll hold over here. Tomorrow, be'ezus Hashem, we hope regular time 9:15. Okay, everyone, have a great night. Bracha v'atzlacha. Kol tov.